The Endless Legion, How Rome Won Lost Wars. The Citizen with Plow and Sword, the foundation of Roman might. To understand why Rome eventually devoured the entire ancient world, you have to look not just at the eagles of its legions, but at the calloused hands of those who formed them. In the early Republic, the Roman army wasn't a caste of professional soldiers or a ragtag band of mercenaries. It was an armed nation, a citizen militia that plowed fields in peacetime and took up sword and shield at the sound of the war horn. The whole system was built on a simple genius principle: those who fight are those who have something to defend. The army wasn't based on conscription but on the census, a tally of citizens and their property. Service in the legions wasn't just a duty. It was a privilege tied directly to land ownership. The more land you had, the better your gear, and the more honorable your place in the ranks. In the front lines, taking the brunt of the attacks, stood the wealthier citizens in bronze cuirasses and helmets. Behind them were the less affluent. The poorest, the proletari, weren't even allowed in the army. It was thought that someone with nothing but children to their name had nothing to defend, so arming them was pointless. This system created an incredibly motivated army. A legionary went into battle not for pay or a distant king's orders. He went to protect his plot of land, his home, the graves of his ancestors, and his children's future. War wasn't a career for him. It was an unwelcome but necessary chore, like weeding the garden to keep invaders from neighboring hills out of his yard. The concept of res publica, the public thing, wasn't abstract to him. It was tangible. Here's my house, my field, the walls of Rome, and all of it needed defending. Don't miss the secrets we're uncovering. Subscribe and hit the like button to join our journey into ancient mysteries. This very principle became Rome's ultimate secret weapon. While other states, Greek city-states, Hellenistic monarchies, Carthage, relied more and more on mercenaries or a narrow elite of professional warriors, Rome had an almost inexhaustible source of manpower at hand. Every citizen, every landowner was a potential soldier. This wasn't just a military resource. It was a demographic ocean. Losing one legion hurt, but it wasn't fatal. The Senate simply called a new levy, and new legions sprang up on the Campus Martius, made of the same stubborn, angry farmers who wanted to settle the enemy quickly and get back to their vineyards. This system worked like a hydra, cut off one head and two more grew in its place. Rome's enemies, used to different rules of war, couldn't grasp it for a long time. They won battles, wiped out entire armies, but the war somehow never ended. Fresh legions replaced the defeated ones, and it all started over. Rome could afford to lose battles. The only thing it couldn't afford was losing the war. And it was this ability to rise after the most devastating knockouts, this stubborn peasant resilience, that turned a small city on the Tiber into the ruler of the world. Pyrrhic victory, the first warning bell for the rest of the world. In the early 3rd century BCE, a man arrived in southern Italy who was considered the greatest general of his time, heir to Alexander the Great's tactical genius. His name was Pyrrhus, king of Epirus. He brought a professional, superbly trained army hardened by Hellenistic wars, war elephants, the tanks of antiquity, and a firm intent to show these Italian barbarians how real warfare was done. And at first he succeeded brilliantly. In 280 BCE, at the Battle of Heraclea, he crushed the Roman army. The Romans, seeing elephants for the first time, were terrified. Their legions were routed. A year later, in 279 BCE, at the Battle of Asculum, history repeated itself. Pyrrhus won again. It seemed the war was won. Any other state would have sued for peace on any terms after 2 such defeats. But not Rome. The Senate, hearing Pyrrhus's envoys, proudly refused negotiations as long as a single enemy soldier stood on Italian soil. Meanwhile, new legions gathered on the fields. And then Pyrrhus, surveying the battlefield strewn with the bodies of his best officers and veterans, uttered the immortal line, "One more such victory, and I am undone." In that phrase lies the essence of the clash between two worlds. Pyrrhus fought by the rules of Hellenistic Game of Thrones. He had a limited, finite army of professionals, each worth their weight in gold. He couldn't afford to lose them in such numbers. His victories came at too high a price. Rome played by different rules. It fought not with an army, but with a people. Losses that were catastrophic for Pyrrhus were mere annoyances for Rome. New men replaced the fallen. The Roman war machine struck a blow, staggered for a moment, then clanked back into formation. This beastly vitality, this ability to absorb blows that would fell anyone else, shook Pyrrhus to his core. He realized he wasn't facing a normal army, but something like a natural disaster. He could win one more, even two more battles, but he couldn't win a war against a people that refused to admit defeat and seemed to have an endless supply of soldiers. In the end, after several brilliant tactical victories, Pyrrhus was forced to slink away from Italy in disgrace. His Pyrrhic victory became a byword, and for the entire ancient world it was the first alarming bell. A new, incomprehensible, and terrifying power was rising in the West, one that didn't know how to lose. Hannibal at the gates, when it cracks but doesn't break. If the war with Pyrrhus was a test for Rome, the Second Punic War was a survival trial, a stress test that would break any system, no matter how sturdy. Rome's opponent wasn't just a talented general, it was a military genius, one of the greatest in human history, Hannibal Barca. He hated Rome from childhood and devoted his life to one goal, its destruction. And he came closer to it than anyone else. His audacious crossing of the Alps with his army and elephants, his crushing victories at the Trebia and Lake Trasimene, shocked Rome. But what happened in 216 BCE on the fields near the town of Cannae wasn't just a defeat. It was a national catastrophe. At the Battle of Cannae, Hannibal, with an army half the size, didn't just beat the Romans, he annihilated them. Using his genius maneuver, the famous Cannae encirclement, he surrounded and slaughtered 50,000 to 70,000 Roman legionaries. It was a massacre, one of the bloodiest in military history. In one day, Rome lost nearly a fifth of its entire male population of fighting age. The consul died, dozens of senators, hundreds of aristocrats. It seemed like the end. Any other state would have collapsed. Allies would have fled. The people would have demanded peace. Hannibal was certain the Romans would now crawl to him on their knees, but he miscalculated. He understood tactics, but not the Roman spirit. Rome's response to Cannae was unbelievable. Yes, there was terror, panic, tears, but no thought of surrender. The Senate banned public mourning and forbade the word peace. Instead, total mobilization was declared. Everyone was drafted into the legions. The property census was lowered. 17-year-old boys were called up. 8,000 slaves were bought and armed, promised freedom. The city emptied. Everyone who could hold a weapon went to the front. Rome, bleeding out, bristled and prepared for the last stand. And Hannibal, at the gates of nearly defenseless Rome, didn't dare storm it. He had won the greatest battle, but realized he was losing the war. He couldn't break this people's will. He could destroy their armies, but new ones sprang up like weeds. He was stuck in Italy like a bear in a trap. He waited for Rome's Italian allies to defect, but most stayed loyal to the Eternal City. Meanwhile, the Romans, gathering new forces, shifted the war to Spain, then to Africa itself, under Carthage's walls. Hannibal had to leave Italy to defend his homeland and was ultimately defeated. The story of the Second Punic War is the starkest example of how resilience and inexhaustible manpower can triumph over even the most brilliant generalship. The Italian alliance, pyramid of human resources. Where did Rome get all these people? Could one city's population, even a large one, withstand such losses? The secret wasn't just in Roman citizens. It was in the unique system Rome built over centuries, subjugating the Italian peninsula. Unlike other conquerors who destroyed or enslaved the vanquished, Romans were far cleverer. They created a complex multi-tiered alliance system. They didn't just rule Italy. They integrated it into their structure. At the pyramid's top were Roman citizens with full rights. One step down were residents of cities with Latin rights or partial citizenship without voting, civitas sine suffragio. Below them were allies, socii, who kept internal self-government but were bound to Rome by eternal military alliances. This system was flexible and pragmatic. Rome didn't try to homogenize everyone. It granted different rights to different communities, rewarding loyalty and punishing rebellion. But one demand was ironclad. In wartime, every city, every ally had to provide a quota of warriors to fight alongside Roman legions, As a result, the Roman army was essentially not Roman, but pan-Italian. For every legionary citizen, there was at least one, often two, warriors from allied contingents. Rome tapped into the manpower of the entire peninsula. This was a massive recruitment pool, up to 700,000 infantrymen and 70,000 cavalrymen, by historians' estimates. No ancient state could dream of such mobilization power. This system allowed Rome to survive Cannae. Yes, tens of thousands of Roman citizens died, but the vast reservoir of allied troops remained largely untouched. Hannibal's strategy was precisely to dismantle this system, luring Italian allies to his side. And he partially succeeded. Some southern Italian cities like Capua defected, but the core of the alliance, central Italian cities, stayed loyal to Rome. For them, the alliance, flaws and all, guaranteed stability, order, and protection. Hannibal was an outsider, a bringer of war and ruin. Most Italians preferred the bird in the hand to the one in the bush. They kept supplying recruits to Roman legions, and this steady flow of fresh blood ultimately drowned Hannibal's military genius. Marius's reforms, the end of the citizen, the birth of the soldier. By the end of the 2nd century BCE, the old system that had served Rome so well for centuries began to falter. Endless wars, now fought not at home but thousands of miles away in Spain, Africa, Greece, ruined small farmers, the backbone of the army. Away on campaign for years, a peasant returned to find his farm in ruins. He fell into debt, lost his land to big landowners buying up latifundia, and drifted to the city, swelling the ranks of the landless proletariat. And without land, he lost the right to serve in the army. The seemingly inexhaustible manpower began to dry up. Rome faced its worst military crisis. Enter Gaius Marius, a new man, not from the aristocracy but a talented general and ambitious politician. Around 107 BCE, he enacted reforms that forever changed the Roman army, and ultimately Roman history. He did what no one before dared. He abolished the property census. Marius opened the legions to all comers, including the landless proletary. The army shifted from a citizen militia to a professional mercenary force. Now men joined not to defend their land but to earn a living. Soldiers got state-issued weapons, pay, and after their term, 16 then 20 years, a land grant. This reform solved the immediate recruitment shortage. Rome gained a new, powerful, professional army that conquered a vast empire. But the price was monstrous. The essence of the legionary changed. He ceased to be a citizen temporarily taking up arms. He became a soldier for whom war was a job and the camp his home. His loyalty now belonged not to the abstract republic and senate, but to his general. The general recruited, led to victory, shared spoils, and, most crucially, lobbied the Senate for veterans' land. The army became a personal tool in the hands of ambitious politicians. Marius's soldiers were loyal to Marius, Sulla's to Sulla, Pompey's to Pompey, Caesar's to Caesar. Thus, the reform that saved Rome from military collapse ultimately killed the Republic. The civil wars of the 1st century BCE were nothing but generals vying for power, using their personal, devoted armies. The Rubicon Caesar crossed wasn't just a river. It was the symbolic boundary where Senate power ended and legion power began. And so the circle closed. The inexhaustible source of citizen soldiers that let Rome beat Pyrrhus and Hannibal dried up, replaced by a new force, a professional army that conquered the world but ultimately conquered Rome itself, turning the Republic into an empire. Thanks for exploring these ancient mysteries with us. Subscribe now and like this video to dive deeper into lost civilization's secrets.